Presentation title shown: Leadership Roles and Opportunities in the Child and Family Services Review, CFSR.
Welcome, everyone. We hope you've been enjoying this year's Child Welfare Virtual Expo so far. I'm Carla Carpenter, CQI Data and Research Manager and CFSR Lead with the Center for States. I use she, her pronouns. And we are very excited to bring you today's workshop on leadership roles and opportunities in the CFSR. As we're doing introductions and kind of setting the stage for today's discussion, I hope you'll take a few moments to introduce yourself in the chat. Next slide, please. In addition to our panel members and facilitators who were listed on the previous slide, who you'll meet in a moment, I would like to thank the other members of our planning team for today's session: Will Hornsby, Sherry Levesque, Jeff Watson, and Mary Kate Myers. They have been instrumental in preparing this workshop and bring a wealth of CFSR knowledge into our discussion, and you'll get to hear from them in some different ways throughout our discussion today. Next slide, please. So we wanted to give you a quick preview of what you can expect during today's workshop. You'll have a chance to hear from your colleagues today about their leadership experiences in the CFSR. During our panel discussion, we encourage you to share your thoughts and questions with us in the chat. We may have some time for questions at the end of the panel discussion, and if we don't have time to get to everyone's question, I do want to note we have an ongoing CFSR Round 4 community of practice for state CFSR teams, which is a very active group and a great resource to connect with your colleagues and follow up with additional questions out of today's conversation. If your state's not already a member of that community of practice and would like to join, please reach out to us after today's session and we will get you connected. In addition to our panel discussion today, you're going to have a chance to connect with other workshop attendees and strategize around some of the common challenges faced by jurisdictional CFSR leaders. So we have a nice interactive session planned for you all today, and we're glad that you selected to spend your time with us. Next slide, please. So we wanted to start with just a little bit of context for our discussion today. If you're a jurisdictional CFSR lead or CFSR coordinator in your state, you know that likely one of the many roles that you have is to communicate about the CFSR with staff, with agency partners. When I was in this role in my jurisdiction and talking with audiences who were newer to the CFSR, one of the things I always tried to emphasize is that the CFSR is a process, not an event. It's grounded in principles of continuous quality improvement, and it's just so much more than a review. The CFSR provides a structured approach to managing systems change. Each of the pieces of the federal CFSR process connects with the steps that are necessary for an effective change management process in an organization or in a system. So it really does provide a great opportunity for overall change management in your system. Next slide, please. Like many things in life, I think the CFSR process is really heavily influenced by what we put into it, right? So I've heard some leaders express the view that the CFSR is a compliance exercise, something we need to kind of grin and bear and get through so that we can move on to other priorities. But I've also seen leaders at multiple levels in jurisdictions who really understand that because the CFSR is a federally required improvement process, there's inherently some weight and importance to it, right? Which brings along with it an opportunity. If we can move beyond treating the CFSR as a compliance-driven event, there is a real opportunity to leverage the process to drive transformational and measurable change in systems. Some of the key ingredients for success in that are the ability to lead from where you are, as our conference theme today suggests, managing up and across your organization. Also, the ability to engage and build support with agency leadership and others. A third key ingredient is clear and consistent communication. And finally, having an approach to the process and taking the approach that the process is a way to further grow a learning and improvement culture within your organization. But thankfully, you don't just have to take my word for it. Today's workshop is going to highlight jurisdictional experiences with each of these key ingredients, and our hope is that you will walk away with at least one concrete new leadership strategy that you can try in your own organization. So I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Teresa Strom, to start us off.
Hi, everyone. My name is Teresa Strom, and I'm the Program Area Manager for CQI CFSR at the Center for States. And we're so glad you have joined us. We would like to know a little bit about our audience. And so we're going to raise up a poll.
The question on screen is, where is your state in the Round 4 CFSR process? The answer options are 1. We haven't started yet. 2. We've started planning. 3. We're working on our statewide assessment. 4. We're in the on-site review process. 5. We're developing our Program Improvement Plan, PIP, or awaiting approval. 6. We're beginning PIP implementation. 7. I don't know or am not sure.
And ask you to let us know where you're at in the Round 4 CFSR process. Maybe you haven't started, and maybe you're all the way at the end. And at the very bottom, if you scroll on that poll, there is an I don't know or I'm not sure, which is perfectly acceptable as well. If for any reason you can't see the poll, you're welcome to give a response in chat as to where you're at. Well, it's looking like we have a lot of folks who are going to benefit from hearing our panelists who are just in the beginning stages of planning. Absolutely. And we have some folks at the PIP end as well. And we're excited for those folks who aren't sure where you're at. This will be a great opportunity to learn from your colleagues. All right, so the vast majority are not sure or have just started planning. So we'll go to the next slide. I want to introduce you to our panelists today. We're going to be hearing from Jodine Bogart with the Missouri Department of Social Services, Sheila Cadoy with the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services, and Haley Inman with the Indiana Department of Child Services. Each one of them is going to give you a quick overview of where their jurisdiction is in this process, and we'll start with Jodine.
Hi, all. My name is Jodine Bogart. I'm the CFSR coordinator in Missouri. We are currently in our PIP approval process. Our third submission of the PIP is due in June. We did complete a Children's Bureau-led review in July. And then one of the highlights from Round 4 that I would lift up is just the level and amount of stakeholder engagement that we had in Round 4 compared to the level in Round 3.
Hi, everyone. I'm Haley Inman. I'm with the Indiana Department of Child Services. My teams oversee our quality assurance reviews and continuous quality improvement. Indiana is currently in our PIP approval process. We have our second submission due at the end of this month. We did a state-led review. Our round officially began in October 22, but then we did our review from April 23 to September 23. One of the highlights from round 4 or round 3 into round 4, in round 3, we scored around 31% on our item 1 timely initiation through a lot of the activities in the PIP that round, and then the ongoing adjustment of those up to round 4, we were able to score at 70% on item 1 in our last on-site review.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sheila Cadoy. I'm the CQI Administrator for Children and Family Services Division in Nebraska. My team leads all of the CQI activities throughout the state, including the CFSR. We are at the very beginning stages of our Round 4, review. Our Round 4 review is scheduled to begin, the on-site reviews to April 2025. So we're really just kind of gearing up to do our statewide assessment at this point. One of the things that is really an opportunity for us is we have a lot of, new leadership that's really excited to, kind of learn from, the things that worked well for us in Round 3, and then, enhancing our process as we move forward with the different steps in Round 4. One of the highlights in Round 3 that we would, worked really well for us that we want to also replicate this time is we had a very a strong core PIP development team that had very diverse representation, and that's something that we look forward to also utilizing a similar approach of stakeholders in this process as well.
Well, welcome, Sheila, Haley, and Jodine. I'm really excited to hear more from each of you today. You all have so many great insights to share from your experiences, and we're going to be covering a lot of ground in today's discussion, from how you've engaged agency leadership and gained support for the CFSR process, to your strategies for managing up and across your agencies, and the ways that you all have navigated challenges in the process. So to start off our discussion, I'm going to ask each of our panel speakers to reflect a little bit further on what types of foundational changes your agency has been able to accomplish out of the CFSR process in the past, or what one of your goals is for your state coming up in CFSR round 4. Haley, you mentioned some pretty significant improvement in performance and timeliness on safety item 1 coming out of the CFSR in your introduction. Would you like to share a little bit more about how you all accomplished that improvement?
Yeah, thanks so much. It was a big focus in round 3 to strongly emphasize safety in that PIP. So through that, we definitely did a lot of problem exploration around timely initiation, because that's our first opportunity to ensure safety. So that, kind of looked at our existing processes, our existing CQI and quality assurance processes too. And we were able to set some strategies around our policy and even state code, and then our general work capacity and process related. So one of the first things that we did was just look at the process by which we're doing some of those actions. So how are we assigning reports? How are we managing that workflow? What data do local offices have available to them so that they're able to track their performance and visualize it as well, so it's usable for people in the front line? We then kind of adjusted things throughout the initial PIP monitoring process, through our rapid improvement events and root cause analysis. And we looked at our policies and state code for what our most immediate timeframes were. So initially, Indiana had a 1-hour response time for our most urgent reports. And we kind of looked at, is that realistic given the size of our state and the sprawl of some of our areas, especially rural communities? So we were then able to justify adjusting our policy and state code for that initiation timeframe to be 2 hours. So it's still urgent, still make sure that we're, taking those as the most urgent and important initiations for the day, but gives a much more realistic time frame for our staff to actually be able to meet that goal. We also then instituted some policies around daily safety staffings or daily safety huddles. So our agency is in a lean transformation, has been for some time, and part of that is something called managing for daily improvement. So we do those daily huddles, and timely initiation was then a big focus of those safety huddles. So we were able to address any immediate barriers to being able to initiate timely on all of our response times, but definitely emphasizing our more urgent ones. So we were just able to really take a look at our workload and capacity and general processes and make big changes, 70% in our most recent measure for the case review, but our aggregate scoring is actually hanging out around 80%.
That's great. And I really love that you highlighted not only the policy change that you made, but some of the other really critical pieces to implementation and really supporting that change in your organization, from the daily huddles to support your teams, and the different ways you incorporated in terms of measurement and keeping that data in front of folks. Really great example. Thank you. Jodine, how about for Missouri?
Thanks. I wanted to highlight one of the strategies that we have in our PIP for round 4. One of the statewide data indicators that Missouri is not currently meeting national performance is permanency within 12 months for foster care entries. So one of the strategies that we identified was a process mapping event where we could kind of outline what the process should look like versus what it is actually looking like. Kansas City is the largest metropolitan area in Missouri for CFSR purposes, and they also have the highest percentage of exits according to the context data that we looked at. So they were chosen as the implementation site for this particular strategy. So we've had a 2-day event, process mapping, kind of outlining the process, like I mentioned, what it should look like versus what it actually looks like. In preparation for that, we also did a case review within Kansas City. We looked at cases where children had achieved permanency through reunification, both some within the 12 months and some beyond the 12 months, just to see what we could learn about the process. A couple of things that highlighted from that case review were the lack of timely adjudications within 60 days per our statute, as well as it was interesting that as children begin unsupervised visitation, the likelihood that they'd meet that permanency outcome increases. So that data was used within the process mapping conversation. We tried to identify bottlenecks within the process to see if we could adjust processes that would still lead to safe reunifications, that reunification's a little bit more timely. So we've had the process mapping event. We came away with a couple of different work groups who will then continue to meet to identify some strategies for implementation to try and see if that process can be shored up a little bit. The last step, key activity within the strategy that I wanted to mention, our capacity building center for states and courts consultants have helped us develop a handbook, kind of step-by-step how we've approached the process so that it can be mirrored in other circuits throughout Missouri.
Really appreciate that example too, Jodine, just really, lifting up the importance of engaging with your legal judicial system partners in this process and really jointly developing strategies and implementing them together. So thank you for that. Sheila, how about for Nebraska?
For Nebraska, I think one of the main foundational changes for us has been just, the development and enhancement of our quality assurance, and CQI system. In round one of the CFSR, Nebraska was, the quality assurance systemic factor was an area needing improvement for Nebraska. As a result of that, over time, we have really, throughout the rounds, really worked to enhance and develop, that system, for us. This really then resulted in us being able to do a state-led review, or really planning to do that state-led review for this round 4. As part of this process over time, the state has really invested in a team, a CQI team, my team that does reviews throughout the state, supports the state in all CQI related activities, and really kind of work on enhancing data that provides timely information to our case managers and our field teams in order to make decisions. So really investing in the process to enhance that for us, as well as being able to have regular meetings, utilizing the information from case reviews to kind of like what Jodine talked about, being able to then really talk about what the root causes are, looking at what our data is telling us, and identifying those things on a regular basis. Also having build up the team so that we are able to kind of follow through and continue to do case reviews using the CFSR tool and other reviews throughout our PIP process, and just really on an ongoing basis as part of that CQI process. One of the things that is a goal for us is to continue to really enhance our data collection processes and methods so that we can truly collect the information that informs how we're doing with all of our systemic factors, and to really be able to then identify the root causes and develop really effective strategies as we go through this round 4 of CFSR.
That's another great example. CQI is so foundational to all of the changes that we want to make within our systems. So that's just a really great example of a transformational and a foundational change that you all have been able to make through the CFSR process. Thanks.
What challenges have you experienced where it was really critical to have your leadership support? And how did you deal with those challenges? And I'd like to start with Missouri. Jodine.
Okay. Well, like I mentioned, the level of stakeholder involvement that we were able to experience in round 4 so far compared to round 3 was vastly different. And to have the level that we did for round 4 really required our agency leadership buy-in. I needed their help knowing the who to invite. We also wanted to make sure that we had representation from across the state, both at the field level and at the central office level. So having their help in recruiting our stakeholders to come to our various events was really instrumental. In kind of assuring their buy-in, we had some conversations just around Children's Bureau expectations in round 4 and how they are different and expanded than we experienced in round 3. We also had conversation around the fact that this is a system review, and as an agency, we can't make change alone. We can't do this in a silo. So how important it was to have stakeholders at the table to get their feedback and their buy-in as well. I also wanted to acknowledge with our leadership that exposing our data can be kind of put them in a vulnerable situation. I just wanted to acknowledge that and let them know that conversations that they might be hearing might be uncomfortable, and it might be they might be tempted to take things personally, and just acknowledge that up front, that it might be a difficult exercise for them. So as an example to kind of help deal with that, both for the permanency outcome that I mentioned before, permanency within 12 months of foster care, and placement stability. Those are the measures that Missouri's not meeting national performance. So for those two specifically, we were able to have kind of a 2-day retreat with our agency leadership team to really kind of dive into the data, what the context data is saying, and do a little bit of problem exploration as an internal team before that information was presented to a larger stakeholder group, just to give them opportunity to process in a safe space before they heard it from in a large group setting. So I really appreciated the attention that they were able to pay. 2 days out of an executive team's schedule is kind of a lot to ask for, but they were willing to do that. And I think they appreciate the opportunity as well.
That is just awesome. The example that you've given us of really helping to set the context with your leadership and preparing them for where things needed to go. How about you, Sheila?
Well, for us in Nebraska, in round 3, we did somewhat similar to Jodine. We did experience some leadership changes kind of in the middle of, in the middle of our CFSR. Had a brand new director that started, right in the middle of that process. So really taking the time to, kind of set the stage, get them, acclimated to the process, really understanding that process was key and was very important during that time. The other pieces, they came on right as we were developing our PIP. And we recognized at the time that we really needed that stakeholder involvement too, needed to be able to get a broader perspective from everyone that's involved in our system. And we were able to really work with that, our new leadership, new director at the time, on to kind of set the stage for that. What we decided to do was implement a core, PIP team. That director really took on the leadership role in that process by really being, a lead in some of the identifying who those members are. We had members from a youth, parent, foster parent, representatives. We had, behavioral health. We had our core, partners. So it was, developed this core team that really met as soon as we got our CFSR results and started really meeting to think about how we then engage our broader stakeholders in order to really then truly identify root causes and develop a really solid PIP that addressed, our needs, areas needing improvement. So as part of that process, this, core team then met on a pretty regular basis, put together, we launched like a kickoff event where we brought stakeholders from across the state to, a 1-day kickoff event to learn about the results. And then really, this core team led different, work groups during that process that focused on the different areas of, safety, permanency, well-being, our systemic factors, and really got feedback, from our partners to then be able to take back and as a core team worked on how do we, use this information to really truly identify those root causes and what those strategies are that we want to, make sure that are involved in the PIP. But also part of this process, we identify how we continue to engage those stakeholders, in as we are developing and then implementing the PIP. So just having that leadership, be very involved in that was very key into a successful, PIP for us.
Thank you. You're talking change and implementation, having that broad array and problem exploration, root cause. I can see how wonderful it probably was to help bring about results that you've had in round 3. Haley, how about you in Indiana?
Yeah, so I think I can echo what everyone has shared here a bit. But I also just wanted to reiterate that leadership turnover impact on this process, because I think it's not unique to us here. I think a lot of states are going to continue to experience that as we move through this round. And that does create some challenges because we lose that knowledge and familiarity with the process. So for me, it was really critical to have that leadership support in understanding that that's what the case is when myself and my direct manager were new in our roles and new to this process, but also us all being understanding of the fact that some of our upper leaders, our other program managers and whatnot, weren't familiar with the process either, especially when we think about it in its like complexities. So people may have been familiar with the on-site review and using that data to guide changes, but they may not have known what all goes into conducting the statewide assessment or developing the PIP. So that was a place where we all needed to be supportive of one another while we were getting familiar with it, while we were learning, sometimes learning the hard way. And then really having their buy-in and support in doing that work so that they could refamiliarize themselves with everything, so that they could have the availability to participate in those work groups and planning meetings, really spearheading a lot of the information gathering that was needed. But one thing that stood out for me was the collaboration with our system partners, specifically our court system. That part was brand new to me. My previous role didn't require me to interact with our court system. So I definitely needed our leaders who had those connections and relationships to start those conversations with them, set up that space for us to have that ongoing collaboration. And now I meet weekly with our court improvement folks. I meet pretty much every 2 weeks with a broader court team. So we really have some good ongoing collaboration and sharing of information as we're in this PIP development phase.
Thank you, Haley. Great point of how important collaboration is with leaders across the spectrum, not just our agencies.
Absolutely. Y'all have talked about some of the types of challenges where support from your leadership's been important for you. And a couple of you've mentioned having newer leadership in your organizations who are also new to the CFSR. So I'm wondering if you might speak to the types of challenges you may have encountered in engaging leadership in the CFSR, and how you've overcome those challenges. And Jodine, we're going to start with you on this one too.
Okay, well, I will echo what Sheila and Haley have mentioned about leadership change. At the director level in Missouri, from the time round 3 was, our program improvement plan was approved and we started implementation until we started round 4, right? We had multiple leadership changes, both at the director level and at the deputy director level. When we think about PIP development in round 3, it was really, most of the strategies were developed at the deputy director level, and didn't necessarily include the regional directors who are responsible for the field work. So as we experience those director and deputy director changes, there really wasn't anyone on that executive team to kind of advocate for the strategies that we had in round 3. So several of those we saw kind of go by the wayside as a new director came in with their own priorities and without that advocacy piece. Like I said, some of the strategies kind of fell away. So lesson learned from round 3. As we approached round 4, we really felt it was important to engage all levels at the leadership within our executive team throughout the process of the CFSR. So from the very start, as we were planning, we had a statewide assessment event in Missouri. They were involved in the outline of that event. And then I asked that there be at least one member from the executive team to attend each of the sessions that we had with our stakeholders. I felt like it was important for the stakeholders to see the exec team there, to know that it was important for our state. But it was important for the executive team members to hear stakeholder feedback and the conversation that happened within those sessions. During our on-site Children's Bureau-led review in July, 3 of our site leads came from the executive team. So they were able to kind of experience the CFSR from a little bit different perspective, kind of in the weeds during a review. So that was important. And then as we worked into our PIP kickoff and the ongoing PIP work groups that we had, several of the leaders of those work groups were members of the exec team. So there's much more buy-in this time around from start to where we are now in looking at the data and doing some root cause analysis and strategy development. And from what I hear, I don't sit on an executive team on a routine basis, but I do hear that in the decisions that our executive team is making, they're considering CFSR and PIP and how the decisions that they're making are going to impact those safety and permanency and well-being pieces for kids and families, which is new to round 4 and really exciting to hear.
Really appreciate that, Jodine. That is huge. And just really great to hear about all of the different ways that you have intentionally engaged your leadership throughout the process, really getting them engaged and immersed in some of the details, but just the right amount, I think, and allowing your leadership to be really visible with partners in the process. That's so important. So thank you for sharing that. Sheila, how about for Nebraska?
For Nebraska, I think it's a lot of the same things. With new leadership, sometimes I think the focus it's hard to keep focusing on CFSR when there's a lot of new initiatives, or new projects. Or things that are priorities that the leadership has to focus on. So one of the things that we really try to do to overcome this is have those regular conversations around how CFSR is not kind of like what Carla talked about. It's not that extra activity. It's not that compliance activity that's outside of the regular things that we do, and really take time to walk through how CFSR connects with our vision, the mission of the things that we're really trying to, accomplish, how it aligns. So then it's not, something extra, but that it really does align with, our goals for safety, permanency, and well-being. And that's a regular conversation that I found to be very important as we have leadership changes, or, even just, with our administrators, field staff, as changes happen, to be able to have those conversations. Some of the things that we've tried over time is, really have a CFSR training implemented as part of, a new worker training. So then we can, as their, workers start and they're in their positions for 6 months, at least 6 months, that they get an overview of what CFSR is about and how that connects to their day-to-day practice, and work, that it's really not, this extra thing. And then really have those quarterly meetings that we have with our, throughout the state to talk about the CFSR review results, and how that connects to the work, and, for those improvements. So for us, it's really been taking the time to, have the conversations about the alignment within, our agency visions, the different initiatives that we have and what that, how that connects to the CFSR outcomes.
I love that, Sheila. Just that need for consistent, clear communication and building connection with the CFSR process by really connecting it to the agency's vision and mission and other priorities and goals of the agency. It's so important that folks really understand how the CFSR can connect to and support that core mission of the agency. Thanks. Haley, if you could speak a little bit to maybe some of the challenges that you've seen in Indiana and how you've overcome them.
Yeah, I think your challenges in engaging leaders are going to be the same in engaging anyone, right? Like it's always the same when it comes to the communication and just the knowledge of the process. So for me, I think it was really important to not just like leading from where you are, but meeting people where they're at. So take that time to take a quick assessment of, where are our leaders and their knowledge of this process. Asking folks like what they know, and then you can fill in the gaps instead of trying to overload with all of the information. I think that was a challenge for me and a lesson learned for me because I was also learning this process. So for me, it was all brand new, and I assume other people knew more than I did. So I was sharing, what stood out to me, and maybe that's not what they needed. So those leaders, kind of being open with me and giving me that feedback of like I needed just this much really helped me as I moved through the process know how to do it differently the next time. But also just recognizing and having grace for the fact that time is a limited resource and our leaders are very busy and have a lot on their plates. So one of the challenges can be asking for the time that you need realistically to do some of these activities. And you might have a tendency to want to be more optimistic with how much time something will take and ask for just a little bit of time. But that ends up taking more time in the long run because it ends up with work and having to revisit those conversations. So definitely explaining to our leaders, like, this is how much time we need for this to be successful and doing it in enough time that you can really plan for that to be feasible for everyone. Anytime that we can also again make those connections back to the work, concrete examples of why these things matter and how they will get you towards your goals, and how your goals as in your division and your unit aren't really any different than the goals that we set up through the CFSR and even in our PIP because they all impact one another. I think the other conversations that have been important is really just having that conversation of what is it that you're trying to achieve and being able to highlight how this will support them in that. The communication piece, even more so important when it came to engaging leaders who are our partners, so external to our agency, having other people involved in tailoring that messaging so that they can speak to, I know what's important to these folks, let me review what that messaging looks like and give feedback there. We even had youth and parents and foster parents create communication for their respective groups that they sent out. And just being clear, I think in this instance, sometimes less is more. Sharing the responsibility of getting the message out and owning the process is important because it makes it so that you are more effective. It's more ingrained locally and in all the spaces that's needed. So I think that when we look at what our leaders want, I think we're all on the same page and that we want progress and we want to achieve these goals. So just being able to show that this isn't extra, like Sheila had mentioned, this isn't something additional. It's something that we're already doing. We just have to do some additional activities in terms of like how we document, and that's kind of where we need their support.
Really appreciate that too, Haley. And the point about asking for what you need and making kind of clear asks, it definitely can be challenging, especially if you're coming into this work and you're new to the CFSR yourself. Kind of figuring out what those needs are and being able to make those clear asks and clear connections. And here's where I'm going to put in a little plug for the center's CFSR community of practice again too, because I think that's a great space where you can connect with colleagues and peers and learn from one another and kind of help shape your understanding of the needs and be able to help communicate more clearly within your own organization too. So just want to put a plug in for that resource for everyone.
Well, as we're focusing on leadership, I'm curious about how you would reflect on your own leadership development through the CFSR process. And what advice might you give to someone else who's also a state CFSR lead, but is new to the role? And I'll start with Sheila.
Hey, thank you. So I was fortunate when I first started my involvement in the CFSR. It was round 2, and I started as a reviewer, a state reviewer for Nebraska. But as I started my involvement, I was fortunate to have a CFSR leader at the time, and a lot of, leadership that had been involved with, round 1 and very, very familiar with the process. So I was able to learn, from them on just, the kind of the basics foundation of CFSR in that process going forward. I think over time, what I've also been able to do is learn from, other leaders from other states, Jody and Haley, others that I've been also been able to reach out to really learn what's worked well for them and what, hasn't worked, and be able to kind of then adapt some things and create our own system here in Nebraska. Personally, I feel like, just having that experience, then, in round 3, really being more involved in the leadership of round 3. And then again, in round 4, just having that, that information, the experience, I feel a little bit more confident in kind of going into round 4 and, how we're going to, do our process. But also something that I've learned is just to be more confident to advocate and ask for the resources that we need, as we, do the different rounds of CFSR. So it's been definitely a kind of a development process for me, building on that confidence and just, being able to advocate and have that knowledge base to effectively advocate for the things we need for the rounds of CFSR. What I would, I guess the advice that I would give is definitely utilize the resources, the Center for the States, like Carla, mentioned. We're finding that this round 4, as we're starting our process, there are some really great resources out there that are, walk through the systemic factors, even, how to, go about your statewide assessment. So I would definitely plug in those resources, utilize those, reach out to other, counterparts in other states. It's been great to be able to learn from what others have done as they go through their process. And then, just the final thing is advocate, advocate for the things that you need to have a successful review.
Thank you, Sheila. I appreciate that. And those who are listening to advice about resources, I do believe that those resources Sheila mentioned are part of the resources that you can download associated with this session. How about you, Haley?
Yeah, I have a lot of reflection in this one because I was brand new to my role when we started our round. And before I had taken on this role, I had 9 years of experience with the agency, 7 of which were in a leadership position. So I felt pretty comfortable and confident upon stepping into it. But I like to joke that I gained an additional 9 years of experience in those 2 years that I've been doing this role because it's just such a bigger world than where I came from. So the development in myself over this time has been significant because it's a whole new skill set than what I was using before. My ability to kind of quickly learn some of these very complex systems change concepts was really important to making sense of this process and being able to then kind of share that knowledge and include the folks in it that needed to be part of it as well. I think that the advice that we would all give is pretty similar, and it is about leveraging your resources, leveraging your relationships. Again, plates are full, so anywhere that we can think about how something that we're already doing or something that's already functioning fits into this process is really helpful. And anywhere you can just see how you refine any of your CQI or QA processes so that it aligns with this really gets more bang for your buck, and it alleviates some of that pressure and overwhelm that people feel when it feels like you're doing so many additional things. Um, any single purpose activities that can be multi-purpose activities, obviously ideal. And the other piece is just being vulnerable. I think that's important, reaching out when you need help and being able to just say, I don't know what help I need, but I need some sort of help, and figuring it out together. The greatest learning that I've had in this process has been when I could learn from others, when I could reach out to peers or folks who had been part of this before and just talk about the challenges I was having. It was also really important for building my confidence, because I think when you are new to it, it's really easy to feel like, well, I'm the only person who hasn't figured this out. And then you talk to others and you realize that's not the case. That a lot of these things are really challenging for all states, and it's helpful to know that you're not alone in that. And the relationships, the engagement with your partners, the engagement with your leaders, because that's so impactful, and we've mentioned it in every question, it can be part of the learning process to know when you have to have those conversations about, well, who is important to this process that we're missing? Who can we delegate to? Because one person can't do all of this. It's quite large and heavy. Who do we need to collaborate with for this to be effective? And I think, again, those planning tools and the guides and tools available on the center site have been immensely helpful. And I know in the poll, a lot of states are just starting or just planning, which puts you really in prime position to use a lot of those, because many of them are getting ready for that step. And they weren't available when we started our round, and I can see now how they would be. So doing some of that stakeholder mapping or even just process alignment conversation really gets everybody on the same page. And again, final lesson learned, as always, start early. If you think you're starting early, start earlier, because again, nothing, more time never hurts, more learning never hurts, and it really just sets you up for longer term success.
Thank you, Haley. I really appreciate you taking this from being a point in time that so many see it as, but as a part of the entire spectrum of your activities, fitting it in. And I do appreciate your start early, then start earlier. You've been a very active member of the community practice, and we've heard that from all your colleagues. So very, very, very valid point. Jodine.
Well, I have been in this position for about 8 years. So at the point that Missouri started round 3, I walked through the entire round 3 process with Missouri in this position. So I found that experience to be really invaluable as we kind of led into round 4. I feel like for me personally, I've just gained confidence in making recommendations to our leadership around not only processes that need to happen, but kind of how those processes need to come to fruition. And because we were successful in round 3, I feel like they trust me in the recommendations that I make. So that's been a really important development piece for me. As far as advice for new CFSR leads, I would echo what Sheila and Haley said. Use your resources. Specifically for Missouri, a little bit different than you've heard from them. We had a team of consultants from the Capacity Building Center for States and for Courts that kind of surrounded us as we've walked through our round 4, even to date. They're still involved with us as we are kind of walking through PIP approval. But that team consists of a CFSR lead consultant, a consultant from the Center for Courts who worked with our CIP. We have a data expert that has really helped us, especially in thinking about systemic factor data support for the statewide assessment. And then part of the team was an expert in parent engagement. So that that team has been really instrumental in helping plan the statewide assessment event and our PIP development as well. They've also been able to come on site and lead some of our sessions for us and provide that support to Missouri, which has been really, really helpful as well. I'd also say I'd highlight our Children's Bureau Regional team as a resource as well. Our team is always asking, what questions do you have? How can we support you in this process? So they've been really helpful as well. I don't feel like any of them are approaching the CFSR as kind of a gotcha compliance approach at all. I feel like they really want to see Missouri improve and improve services that are available for kids and families. And that's come through kind of in the ongoing meetings that we've had with Children's Bureau as well.
That's so great to hear, Jodine. Thank you. So I think we have time for one more question. I don't see any questions in the chat, although there are really great insights on what folks are hearing around the concrete strategies that you all are talking about. But I do have one more question for our panel. We know that workforce challenges are really pervasive across the nation in child welfare and in our partner systems as well. And I'm just curious whether and how you've navigated any workforce challenges or constraints while working through the CFSR and what opportunities you might see for developing new leaders within your organization to support the CFSR process. Haley, can we start with you on this one?
Sure. I think I touched on this in the previous one, but of course, the conflicting schedules and priorities is always your barrier with your workforce. And something that could be really impactful for that is taking that time to do the intentional planning and stakeholder mapping, because your leaders will need to delegate to other individuals. They can't be in every room and every meeting. So we have to trust some of our staff to be able to make those decisions. And I think having them part of that stakeholder mapping activity gives them that feeling like, well, I'm having someone there who I know I could just add input into how get that information back as well. But that really creates those opportunities for staff at all levels to act as leaders in this process and to become familiar with the process, because inevitably they'll be the ones who step into those roles later on when our current leaders are gone. And the idea being, we want long-term success of this process. Again, anytime that we can eliminate any overwhelm by drawing those parallels, even if it's in the language that we use, if we have, familiar language with something we're already doing that is a little different maybe from CFSR language, I think even taking the intentional effort to use common language has helped with people feeling less, impacted by this process. And then, we've talked on it in every question too, but anywhere we can build in an activity or strategy to enhance your existing CQI or quality assurance process that incorporates these pieces so that it is ongoing. So even after you're out of your round, you want these things to continue, and that way it doesn't feel any different when you step into the next round. So I think that's the approach that I'm kind of taking to it is, who knows who will be here when our next round comes around, but my hope is that we have a bit better process and infrastructure so that it's not such a bear of a task.
Appreciate that. Jodine, has Missouri experienced any workforce challenges that have impacted your CFSR?
I think the thing that came to mind when I saw this question was the number of case reviews that will be required to meet the minimum applicability standards for PIP monitoring in round 4 kind of stressed us out in Missouri a little bit. Our quality assurance staff is pretty limited. We have 14 people in our unit and only 5 are dedicated to the case review process itself. So everyone in our unit does participate in the reviews, but several of them have other primary job responsibilities. So case reviews kind of become another duty as assigned. So in addressing that challenge, we reached out to, we have field operations specialists in Missouri who are regionally based. They have responsibility for program improvement within the circuits. So they're on board and helping us with reviews this time. We also have contracted case management agencies in Missouri who, as part of the contract, have QA designees. So those QA designees are on board and trained to do some reviews for us this round. And then in relation to that contract, we have contract oversight specialists who have responsibility to make sure the contracts are kind of flowing as needed. They also have responsibility for some oversight. So they've been trained to pick up some case reviews this time as well. So fingers crossed, we're hopeful that as we start and jump into PIP monitoring, we have sufficient staff to meet the need for that minimum number of cases this time.
Like that creative solution in terms of partnering with your contracted providers as well in this work. Great. Sheila, how about for Nebraska?
For us, we've been, I think as part of like developing our CQI, process and team, I'm fortunate to have a dedicated team. I have 5 supervisors within the CQI unit that supervise staff that are, dedicated to doing, case reviews, including the CFSR. So, it's, one of the main duties. So fortunate that we have a team of dedicated staff to do that, and feel like we're going to be able to do that for our upcoming run for, state-led review, then hopefully throughout the, PIP process. Training our staff, is something that, we do internally. So it's as an ongoing thing, we're continually trying to develop the process, what that onboarding looks like, and maintaining the proficiency within our, QA team and the reviewers. The other challenge for us has been, as the field staff, turnover, of leadership, and as case managers, supervisors, just really being intentional about that education and involvement is as new people are on board to really connect to the CFSR, kind of like I mentioned earlier. So then it connects to our vision and our goals of safety, permanency, and well-being. So I previously mentioned that we intentionally made it part of our new worker training to have an overview of of the CFSR, and we have recently also done CFSR trainings for supervisors, administrators that are really very focused on not just understanding the tool, but really how that safety, permanency, well-being is really just a connection, impacts, it's connected to the work that they do, daily. And then, and I think, Haley also talked about just really embedding it into some of the things you're currently doing. So, in our last round, we looked at really kind of redoing our case staffing model, enhancing that, and we created like a CFSR checklist that went through the different items, safety, permanency, and well-being, and how that kind of built into the case staffing process and utilizing that checklist. So really looking for those opportunities to continually have those, that communication in the training discussions as we have new staff on board, whether that's, in my team that's dedicated to the reviews or with our broader, field staff.
Really great examples of how you are building it in, embedding it in the day-to-day work, so that it's not something new when the CFSR rolls around, and that your workers, your staff have that foundational information about the CFSR, and it connects to the core practices that they're learning and doing every day. I love that. All right. Well, I just want to thank all of our panel members for your insights. Jodine, Haley, Sheila, incredible discussion with our panel today. I'm going to turn things over to Teresa to introduce what we're going to do next.
Yes, thank you, Sheila, Jodine, Haley. I really appreciate your insights. And next, we're going to go to some breakouts. Each room will have a facilitator with a scenario, and there'll be some prompts to help us come up with some strategies or solutions for the scenario. It's challenges related to leadership that a CFSR lead might encounter. And when we come back from those, we will have the opportunity to share a couple of those solutions or strategies with the larger group.
So I think we're back from the breakout groups.
The speaker is identified on screen as Will Hornsby, Capacity Building Center for States, he, him.
That was quick and fun. So we want to take a few minutes here just to get a highlight or two from each of the breakout groups. So, thinking about strategies, solutions, kind of what are some of the key things of thinking that the person may want to do. And why don't we just start with challenge 1, resistance from a critical system partner. So Sherry, you or somebody from your group, anything to highlight?
Yeah.
The speaker is identified on screen as Sherry Levesque, ICF International Inc., she, her.
Definitely. One of the things that sort of built on what we heard in the panel was the strategy of leveraging relationships, trusted relationships that maybe another person in the system has with that partner, to sort of begin that relationship and kind of open the door and make that connection. And then the second thing was, and this is really important in 2024, I think, as we've all sort of gotten used to some different ways of interacting, but the importance in some instances of making connections in person where it's possible, and the sort of the role that plays in the overall communication and the sort of preference of the people that you're working to engage and trying to partner with, for that, and being able to meet that when you can.
Great. Thanks, Sherry. So we'll keep rolling here. So challenge 2, resistance to engaging lived expertise. Mary Kate, you or somebody from the group, a couple of things to highlight?
Yeah, sure.
The speaker is identified on screen as Mary Kate Myers, Capacity Building Center for States, she, they.
So firstly, when we were thinking about ways to increase leadership interest and buy-in to new and innovative engagement strategies, we really were just thinking about understanding the resistance and having an honest conversation, really thinking about why are sometimes people are afraid of change. Why is that? And how can we meet people where they're at? And then looking at CFSR and PIP timelines are quick. Other state strategies move very quickly. So how can the teams work with those timelines to quickly engage and support partners while building trust and relationships? And really that kind of took us to highlighting some of the existing resources that exist. So one of those examples are the engaging young people with lived experience in the CFSR's resource that exists on the CFSR portal. And another one of those resources is the preparation checklist for engaging young people and families in the CFSR from the Center for States, the Capacity Building Center for States, on the CFSR webpage. So those are just a couple of our highlights.
Thanks, Mary Kate. That's great. Challenge 3, resource and staffing constraints. So Jeff or anybody from the group, I'm interested in the highlights here.
Sure thing. Thanks, Will.
The speaker is identified on screen as Jeff Watson, Capacity Building Center for States, he, him.
Yeah, we had a great just time kind of talking about our scenario. In our scenario, we had a CFSR lead, Jennifer, who had significant resource and staffing constraints. She had a very small team, ran into a lot of challenges meeting timelines, a lot of those kinds of specific issues about resource and staffing constraints. We had some great comments in the chat. A really one I wanted to highlight was kind of managing, I called it managing up and down. When our CFSR lead Jennifer is facing these constraints, has a really small team, what is she doing in her one-on-one staffings with her management, her leaders? And it kind of just tied into all of our discussion we had today about engaging leadership in the CFSR, not viewing it as just a compliance process. But if Jennifer is really kind of having significant staffing constraints, as she's expressing these concerns to her leadership. So managing that kind of up and down, saying like, we need some help on this process. It's not just a one-time thing. This is the way it needs to be. We really had a specific question about specialized training, because we know there's lots of specialized expertise needed in the CFSR around data analysis, technical writing, all those kinds of great things. So we talked a lot about cross training, really kind of preparing staff for the need that's coming up. We know that's coming down the line with CFSR. So some of that cross training, like getting prepared, almost trying to get in front of what's coming down instead of being too reactionary about it. And the last idea we really had was kind of reaching outside the agency for help. We had kind of a great comment about in some states, we've seen them reach out to their legal judicial communities and other people to help be CFSR reviewers, to help manage some of that load, or partnering with a state person to manage some of that load for the CFSR reviews, the actual review process. So yeah, some great ideas about those resourcing and staffing constraints. So I think those were our highlights. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff. So challenge 4, data transparency, Carla or somebody from your group.
Absolutely. So we had a couple of really great suggestions too that came out of our discussion. And one was thinking about building into your CFSR core team within your organization roles for legal and comms as well, and thinking about bringing those folks into the process early, and helping them be a part of it from an early point. We also had a lot of conversation around thinking holistically about the CFSR, as well as other strategic and federal planning processes. So with our scenario, we were really thinking about how our state CFSR league could really take steps to communicate further and build understanding of the purpose of the statewide assessment and the very specific questions that we're trying to answer with the statewide assessment, and also highlight opportunities where there will be additional opportunity to bring more data into ongoing exploration of root causes, particularly as the state is thinking about solutions and strategies for their program improvement plan, and also thinking big picture about how which pieces might fit best within the state's child and family services plan and APSR cycle. So, all of these processes need to work together and be integrated, and each of them has very specific components, particularly on the CFSR side, as we think about the specific, again, purpose of the statewide assessment. So thinking about how all those pieces can fit together and work together, and how we can use data effectively in each specific piece.
Right. Thanks, Carla. So I was with the Challenge 5 group, competing priorities, and Jeff, our fictional CFSR coordinator, had a name as well. Poor Linda was dealing with trying to get ready for statewide assessment. There's some highly publicized child safety issues in child protection cases that forced the Blue Ribbon Commission that the governor's office is engaged in, and the child welfare directors having to communicate around that. Possibility of some type of class action litigation. On top of that, involved in CCWIS implementation and transitioning from a legacy system. So our group was going, Linda's got a lot on her plate, but was going, well, we can see this happening. And a couple of things that kind of resonated with me was that Linda needed to kind of do a crosswalk at the very beginning to kind of understand what all is happening, to try to help prevent being overwhelmed, and to think about what what's going on and what are some possible interconnections. And we had some discussion about, things that are being done for the Blue Ribbon Commission can be done to inform the statewide assessment, and things being done for the statewide assessment can inform the Blue Ribbon Commission. And they've got to be paying attention to the data issues that are going on and thinking about how's that being pulled into this. And so like this message of not doing it alone, of who's the right people to be plugged in and to be talking to and to be engaging. That's kind of where our discussion was as a group. All right, this was fun. And let's hand things over to Carla. Thanks for everybody's participation in the breakout.
Thanks so much, Will. And yes, thank you to everyone for engaging with us in a little problem solving. We appreciate it. I really just want to take a moment as we close things out to thank the Children's Bureau for their support of this session. I want to thank our panel members again, Haley Inman, Sheila Godoy, and Jodine Bogart. You all were amazing and really appreciate all of the insights that you shared today. I want to thank our planning team and the facilitators for the breakouts. And I want to thank all of the participants, all of you, for spending your time with us today. We really appreciate it.
Text on screen reads, "This video was developed for the Child Welfare Virtual Expo by the Capacity Building Center for States and is sponsored by the Children's Bureau. Its content does not necessarily reflect the views and policies of the Children's Bureau.